In Iran, what is increasingly beginning to look like a new revolution has erupted. In this video, we will take a detailed look at what has happened over the last few days, what these developments actually mean, and how this could end for one of Russia's key allies in the Middle East. I already published a video a few days ago, which I will link here. In that earlier video, I explained the underlying causes of the unrest and also why calls for the return of the Shah have been growing louder. Among the demonstrators, chants demanding the return of the monarchy are becoming more frequent, which is a remarkable development in itself. Since then, the situation has escalated further. We are no longer seeing only demonstrations, but also an increasing number of strikes and work stoppages. One particularly significant example is a strike at the South Pars refinery complex. This facility is critically important for the Iranian economy, as it is located at one of the country's most vital gas fields. In addition to this, 7 Kurdish groups have reportedly called for a general strike. At the same time, more and more videos are emerging from cities across the country showing that protest groups are steadily growing in size. What makes this even more explosive are the growing number of recordings showing regime forces being driven back by civilians. In several clips, we can clearly see uniformed personnel retreating. Their insignia are visible, and shortly afterward, civilians move in and force them to flee. All of this is happening alongside demonstrations that are becoming larger and more confident by the day. There are also recordings showing long columns of demonstrators moving through entire cities, stretching far beyond what we have seen in previous protest waves. In the meantime, the government has officially acknowledged that 2 security personnel were killed several days ago. This admission alone tells us that the level of violence has risen significantly. That was already the situation the day before yesterday, and since then the protests have continued to escalate. Another extremely important development is the recurring pattern surrounding funerals. There are reports that after the burial of demonstrators who were killed, new unrest and protests broke out. Historically, this is highly significant. The same mechanism played a decisive role in the fall of the Shah decades ago. Back then, demonstrations were met with military force, people were killed, and their funerals became rallying points that further fueled public anger. Each funeral led to even larger demonstrations, which in turn triggered harsher crackdowns, creating a self-reinforcing spiral. Within weeks, this dynamic contributed directly to the collapse of the old regime. What we are now observing in Iran looks strikingly similar. Yesterday, new protests erupted in additional cities. In more and more locations, mass gatherings are taking place. The Crown Prince in exile, Reza Pahlavi, had called for protests at 8 p.m, and according to a BBC Iran journalist, these were the largest protests he has ever witnessed. He noted that he has been following developments in Iran since 2009, which puts this statement into perspective. The level of public anger is clearly rising, and the number of people willing to take to the streets is growing rapidly. Videos from yesterday show large crowds spread across vast parts of the country. There are also new recordings showing Iranian flags being torn down. In one particularly striking video from an Iranian city, we can see the flag of the former monarchy being raised. This is an open and unmistakable display of solidarity with the Pahlavi era and with the pre-revolutionary Iranian state. In response, the regime shut down the internet. Since then, far fewer videos have surfaced, but despite the information blackout, it has been confirmed that violence continues to escalate. BBC Persian, for example, confirmed that a television building belonging to the Revolutionary Guards was set on fire. This indicates that demonstrators are no longer just clashing with security forces in the streets, but are actively targeting regime-supporting infrastructure. At the same time, we are hearing more and more gunfire in video recordings. This strongly suggests that the government is increasingly resorting to lethal force on a broader scale. There are also reports that flights were diverted. Aircraft were still able to leave Iran, but incoming flights were halted. Opposition sources have reported additional deaths among demonstrators since yesterday. At the same time, Starlink communications are reportedly being disrupted. Starlink systems have been used by opposition groups to maintain uncensored contact with the outside world, and interfering with them shows how determined the regime is to cut off information flows. Some reports claim that the number of people killed may now exceed the casualties during the recent conflict with Israel. These claims must be treated with caution. From outside the country, it is simply impossible to independently verify such figures. All we can do is assess whether the sources have been reliable in the past, and many of these opposition channels have indeed provided accurate information before. What is clear, however, is that there have also been numerous deaths among regime security forces. The violence is not one-sided. This alone implies that there must also be a significant number of casualties among the demonstrators. Another interesting development is that the internet blockade appears to be partially eased again. It remains to be seen whether this will allow the opposition to resume sending information abroad more effectively. There are also reports of foreign involvement. Opposition media claim that Iraqi militias are assisting in suppressing the protests. Once again, this is very difficult to verify independently. Opposition outlets have a clear incentive to present the situation as more dramatic in order to encourage international intervention. If this claim were true, however, it would be extremely noteworthy. It would suggest serious loyalty issues within Iran's own security forces. Even if the reported figure of around 800 foreign militia members were accurate, that number would be insignificant in a country of Iran's size. Iran can theoretically mobilize close to 1 million personnel through its regular military, the Revolutionary Guards, and the Basij. From that perspective, 800 fighters would be meaningless. But their presence would indicate that the regime may be struggling to rely on its own forces to carry out repression. There are also claims from human rights organizations that some government troops have been arrested for refusing to follow orders, allegedly because they declined to shoot at demonstrators. Another factor escalating the situation is the international context. Donald Trump has previously warned against the killing of demonstrators. There is no doubt that protesters have been killed, which raises the risk of further escalation. Iran's government is under immense pressure, not only because of the economic crisis that has worsened since the conflict with Israel, but also because of these external threats. Reuters summarized this situation by quoting Iranian officials who said that this dual pressure has severely limited Tehran's room for maneuver. The leadership now finds itself trapped between public outrage at home and increasingly harsh demands and threats from Washington, with no low-risk options left. Several current and former officials reportedly share this assessment. One official even suggested that after seeing what happened in Venezuela, some in Tehran fear Iran could become the next target of an aggressive US foreign policy. At the same time, opposition media continue to report that protests are not only growing, but that chants calling for the Shah are becoming more common. It is important to be cautious here as well. The actual level of support for Reza Pahlavi inside Iran remains difficult to assess. The Iranian opposition abroad is largely pro-monarchy, and it is primarily these groups that distribute many of the videos. This introduces a potential selection bias. That said, the sheer scale of yesterday's protests suggests that something fundamental is happening. On the one hand, the large crowds may be partly due to Pahlavi's call for action. On the other hand, it is entirely possible that the protests are now gaining momentum on their own, simply because the situation is escalating so rapidly. Regardless, it is remarkable that pro-Pahlavi slogans are now being heard inside Iran itself. According to reports, Iran's foreign minister has already told pro-regime media that this is a fight for the survival of the Islamic Republic itself. That statement reportedly appeared in the New York Times on January 4th, several days ago. There are even unconfirmed reports that preparations have been made for Ayatollah Khamenei to flee to Moscow. If we summarize the situation, several points stand out clearly. The scale of the protests is continuing to grow. Economically, the regime has very limited options to calm the population. It simply does not have the money for large-scale subsidies, price controls, or significant wage increases. Iran is effectively broke. But what happens when the mullahs finally fall? Israel, for its part, would clearly benefit from the fall of the Iranian regime and would have every reason to support the opposition as much as possible. Even without concrete evidence, this strategic logic is obvious. We are therefore increasingly justified in speaking of a potential revolution. Whether it succeeds or fails remains uncertain. Much will depend on whether and how the United States chooses to intervene. Even limited actions, such as cyber operations, airstrikes, or the deployment of special forces, could significantly weaken the regime and embolden the opposition. There have been rumors in recent days about the movement of US special forces toward the region. Such movements could also be related to entirely different events, such as the incident involving a Russian tanker south of Iceland. The timing overlaps, but that doesn't prove a connection. What does seem increasingly clear, however, is that large parts of the population are no longer calling for minor reforms or slightly less repression. Calls for a completely different political system are growing louder. And when a society reaches that point, it is no longer about reform. It is about regime change. At this moment, the outcome is still open. But the Iranian regime is under a level of pressure it has not experienced in a very long time. It is entirely possible that within this year, the current system in Iran could collapse. That's all for now. If you found this analysis useful, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If you want to stay informed and not miss future videos, feel free to subscribe and activate notifications. And if you have additional insights or information, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.